Welcome back everybody, I hope you're having a great day. Today we're having a lovely sunny day in West Wales. We're doing something a little bit different. We're out in the garden and we are brewing honey ale. This is a recipe that I've made up after looking at different styles and doing a bit of research. The style we're heading towards today is an American pale ale using honey malt and honey to give it that aroma and flavour. I've purchased the grains in the exact amount that I need so that I can put them in a bucket and then just pour it into a kettle to make our mash. These grains will be Simpson's Finest Pale Ale Golden Promise, Vienna Malt, Wheat Malt, Honey Malt, and Crystal Heritage. The mashing process is pouring all our grain into our kettle, into the hot water to extract all the sugars from the grain, making our wort. The kettle has already had a bit of flame. I believe it's now reached around 70 degrees, so we're going to turn the flame off and put in our grain. You're going to want to add your grain to the kettle in the bag slowly and stirring along the way. Once you've added your grains, you just want to check the temperature again. You're aiming to keep it around about 65 to 67 degrees Celsius. And then once you've done that, you just pop your lid back on. And you leave that sit and mash for about 90 minutes. So it's going to steep in the pot now at around that 65-67 degrees Celsius for 90 minutes. If you like, you can use this time to sanitize your equipment, or if you like to feel like you're doing something, you can take the lid off, stir it around and check for any dough balls. If you find any dough balls, just give them a mash up. Or if you like, you can just sit back and have a home brew. So what I'm going to do now, for the last 10 minutes on the mash, I'm just going to put the heat back on and let the temperature rise. Now we've reached the end of our mash, so I'm going to take the bag out and let it strain. I'm going to leave the heat on to reach the boiling temperature. I'm also going to take about 1.5 to 2 litres sample, and I'll show you what we'll do with that next. If we were to do a sparging method, this is when you would sparge. You'd rinse the grain with some fresh water just to get all the excess sugars from the grains. While our kettle is heating up, let's go inside and I'll show you what to do with our little sample. So with your little bit of a sample, you just want to boil it quickly for about 5 minutes. And then you want to pour it into a clean container, and then you let that cool. So while that's heating up, I'll tell you more about the hops that we're using today. So the first hop I'll talk about, and I'm going to butcher this name, is Hallertau, which is clearly a German hop. It features a lightly floral and a spicy aroma. I'll be using a total of 90 grams for this hop. The other hop that I'll be using is called Chinook, which is an American hop. This hop can contribute to herbal, piney and a smoky sort of aroma to it. The total of that hop I'll be using will be 20 grams. And the time frame for when these hops will be added will be here. Later, at the end of the fermentation process, I will be adding cascade hops, dry hop, and I'll be using a total of 50 grams, but we'll get to that later on. You do this to sterilise the wort, stop enzymatic activity of the mash, concentrate your wort, to boil off unpleasant aroma compounds, extract bitterness from the hops, adjust the wort colour and flavour. All of these reasons play a significant part in the final outcome of the beer. Its colour, bitterness, flavour, intensity and overall character are particularly a factor of the boil. Now that you've reached your rolling boil, it's time to add your first set of hops, and this will run for 60 minutes. There it is. That's our alarm for our 20-minute boil time. So let's stick our next set of hops in. Along with this set of hops, I am adding one Proflac tablet, which will help clear our brew in the long run. Some Proflac tablets, which is a natural product that you add to the wort in a kettle to enhance protein removal as the wort cools. This product helps remove the substantial quantities of haze forming in the material without affecting the head retention. At this point, you would use a wort chiller. You could dunk this into your boiling brew to help sterilise it. And then at the 0 point of our brew, when you turn the heat off, you'd run cold water through one end, which you run through the wort chiller and out the other end. It goes without saying, this helps to cool down the wort. If you'd like to see a video on that, comment down below. Alternatively, you can use the no-chill method, which is what I'll be using, in which when you pour your wort into the fermenting bucket and you leave it 24 hours to cool down. This works well for me as I'm using a vitality starter. Remember that 2 litre sample that we took earlier, that we boiled and then cooled down? We can now add our yeast to it as it will have chilled down to 20 degrees Celsius. This will help build a strong colony to that, and then we can add that to our wort tomorrow. Okay, so now it's time to add our last addition of our hops. And then we turn off the heat. These last bits of hops are more for aroma than bitterness. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a kilogram of honey. This will help raise our original gravity, giving us a high alcohol by volume. I'm also hoping it might give a little bit of sweetness to it and a slight bit of honey taste, but I plan on adding more honey to it later. I'm adding it to the kettle now, while the heat is off, so it doesn't burn at the bottom of the kettle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the lid on that, let it cool down a little bit, and let's make our starter. For this ale I'm using White Labs WLP 008 or East Coast Ale yeast. This yeast strain is quoted as a great yeast for golden blondes, honey, pales and German style ales. So let's give it a go. Now that our sample wort has cooled down, all I'm going to do is pour the liquid yeast into that sample and give it a good stir. Then you want to cover it over and leave it covered for about 24 hours so that the yeast can grow and colonize. Once it's done that, you can add it to the bigger batch later on. Okay, so the last thing you want to do now is add your wort to your fermentation vessel. I had filled this up earlier with sanitized water. I've let that go cold and now I'm going to fill it full of our wort. If you're interested in knowing how to add a tap to a stock pot to make a kettle like the one I've used today, click the eye in the top right corner. It's been 24 hours since we made our wort. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our first hydrometer reading. This will be our original gravity. Then what I'll do is I'll give it a stir and then we'll add our yeast. Before you add your yeast, remember you have to oxidize it to introduce oxygen to help the yeast grow. Once you've aerated your wort, you want to go back to your yeast starter that we made yesterday. Take the foil off it, and you can see it's already started, which is exactly what we wanted. So now just give that a stir up. And again, just give it a good stir in. Sanitize the bucket lid and put that straight on. So that's it for now. We'll just leave this now for about 2 weeks, 10 days. We'll check on its progress. We don't want to be lifting the lid. We really want to keep this under pressure and sealed. Once the bubbles seem to be slowing down in the airlock, we'll then lift the lid and take a check then. It's been 10 days since we added our yeast starter, and as you can hear, we're still fermenting. But what I'm going to do in this segment, I'm going to take a quick hydrometer reading just to see how we're getting on, and I'm going to do our dry hop. This will be adding hops to a bag and just chucking them in and letting them sit for about 5 days, just for the aroma and the flavour to come through from the hops. On first look,
this is how we're doing. It smells lovely.
The reason why I keep sealing the lid is I'm trying to reduce the oxygen getting to the wort. At this point in the brew, you really don't want to introduce oxygen, as that could spoil the flavours. We're reading around about 10-15 on the hydrometer reading. Ideally I wanted to drop down to about 10.8 or 10.6. So I think it's got a little bit more fermenting to do. So originally I was going to add 50 grams, but today I've changed it to 65 of our Cascade hops, which smell incredible. Don't think so. Stick them in our bag. The bag has been sanitized. It's a little bit wet. Bag. And then I just stick them in. Just throw them in. And give that a good stir. After those 5 days, we'll take that bag out and then I'll add some beer finings. But we'll get to that in just a second. It's been 5 days since we added our dry hop bag, so the first thing I'm doing today is I'm going to take that straight out. These are the bits you really don't often see. Okay, now that that's all cleaned up, I'm going to be adding our beer finings. This is a simple solution that you just add to your beer for a couple of days and it'll help clear it down. This particular one I'm using is Young's Brew beer fining. One solution of this should be enough for 23 litres. In this segment of the video, what I'll be showing you is racking from our fermentation bucket into our bottling bucket. I'll also be touching on the subject of priming. I've already made our priming sugar, which I'll show you now. To make our priming starter today, what I decided to use is 200 grams of British honey, and I'll complement that with 200 milliliters of water just to dilute it. This water was warm enough to melt the honey, roughly around 55 degrees. You're making this as a simple solution of sugar to add to your beer. As you're adding sugar to the beer, it will ferment a little bit more, adding that little bit of fizz to your beer. With that being done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour that into our bottling bucket, and then I'll rack on top of that, and then we'll bottle. I'm racking this particular way down the airlock tube to try and reduce the amount of oxygen in contact with the beer. Even with the auto siphon, we are reducing the amount of air bubbles coming into contact with our beer. I've been checking the gravity reading for the past 3 days just to make sure that we are at a set stop. Our brew today finished at 10:10, which is a pretty good number. I was hoping for it to go down a little bit more so that we could get about 5.5% alcohol, but finishing on 10:10 leaves us with 5.25% alcohol. After adding our priming sugar, this will probably reach around 5.3 to 5.5. To fill my bottles, I'm using a bottling wand, which is a long tube with a spring block attached at the bottom. Once pressure is applied to this spring, it releases the fluid into the bottle, leaving just enough headroom in the neck. Thank you so much for sticking around to the very end of the video. If you've enjoyed, please consider subscribing. All my socials are up the top there, so please give that a like and a follow. And until next time, cheers.